As the Persian Gulf War was coming to a close, the coalition forces against the Iraqi government aimed for one last push. Under Operation Desert Storm, American forces sought to attack the Iraqi military defending Baghdad, the country's last stronghold and most heavily guarded area. Operation codename Package Q was the war's largest airstrike, meant to destroy critical objectives before ground units could enter the city. The objectives included the Tuwaitha Nuclear Research Center near Baghdad, defensive zones where surface-to-air missiles and anti-aircraft guns were stationed, as well as barracks and other military depots. U.S. forces were confident in their superior numbers, aircraft, and overall technology. Still, the Iraqi enemy defending its homeland was a force to be reckoned with. Package Q was launched on January 19, 1991. It had an unsatisfactory outcome, as it was neither a failure nor a success. Although Baghdad was heavily bombed, with hundreds of civilian and military casualties, the Iraqi nuclear research facility was not destroyed. Military analysts and personnel attributed Package Q's merely average results to a series of communication problems, sudden changes of strategy, and an accumulation of minor mishaps. This combination of factors proved that military superiority amounts to nothing when there is no coordination between the parties involved. The Gulf War. On August 2, 1990, the Iraqi army invaded its neighbor, Kuwait. The global community instantly condemned the unjustified occupation. The United Nations Security Council initiated economic sanctions against Iraq 4 days later. The invading Iraqi forces cared very little about the global outrage and refused to withdraw from Kuwait. After the deadline imposed by the UN, a coalition force led by the US was assembled to attack the Iraqi army. According to the US Department of Defense, quote, "The US had supplied Iraq with military aid during its 8-year war with Iran, giving Iraq the 4th largest army in the world at that time. This posed a threat to Saudi Arabia, another major exporter of oil. If Saudi Arabia fell, Iraq would control 1/5 of the world's oil supply. The Iraqi leader also was reportedly violating United Nations resolutions, so the US had UN support in responding to Iraq's invasion of Kuwait. The Gulf War ensued. The conflict would last from August 1990 to February 1991. It was divided into 2 fronts, with codenames Operation Desert Shield and then Operation Desert Storm while in its combat phase. Back in the US, the conflict was also known as the Video Game War, because of the amount of footage broadcasted by the media of US bomber cameras during operations. Operation Desert Storm would also become the most extensive air campaign and military coalition formed since the Vietnam War. Based on data gathered by the U.S. Department of Defense, the U.S.-led coalition forces, quote, flew more than 18,000 air deployment missions, more than 116,000 combat air sorties, and dropped 88,500 tons of bombs. Package Q strike. In January 1991, Operation Desert Shield evolved into Operation Desert Storm. The U.S. had successfully assembled a fighting force of 700,000 men in Saudi Arabia with the help of 39 allied nations. Desert Storm's objective was to strike Baghdad, the heart of Iraq, where President Saddam Hussein coordinated the army and the government. Unrelenting aerial attacks would weaken the Iraqi army and test its air defenses before soldiers moved forward on the ground to invade the city. Baghdad was heavily defended. The city was protected by a ring of hundreds of surface-to-air missiles, anti-aircraft guns, and heavy artillery to repel ground troops. Its defenses ranged from state-of-the-art technology to World War II-era armament. The Iraqi army also had several air bases near the capital, from which they could rapidly launch their own aircraft. The Iraqi Air Force had Soviet Mikoyan MiG-29 twin-engine combat jets at its disposal. This fighter aircraft, first introduced in the early 80s during the last years of the Cold War, was a worthy opponent to the American F-15 and F-16 fighters that the U.S. Air Force used at the time. In total, Saddam Hussein's Iraqi Air Force had 55 aircraft, which included 10 MiG-29s, 25 MiG-23s, and 20 MiG-25s. They were well prepared when it came to fighting the Americans. Although underpowered in many ways, the Iraqis still posed a significant threat. On the other hand, coalition forces numbered 78 aircraft, of which 56 were General Dynamic F-16s, 14 F-15Cs, 6 F-4s, and 2 EF-111s, which would be vital for jamming enemy radars. The Central Coalition Strike Force was composed of the F-16 388th Tactical Fighter Wing, located at Al Minhad in the United Arab Emirates, and the 401st Tactical Fighter Wing in Doha, Qatar. Other aircraft would have to fly from the Torrejón Air Base in Spain and locations as far as the US. It was the largest assembly of F-16s in history. American pilots were confident that US equipment and tactics would take down Iraq's defensive command and control system. If that was not enough, all of NATO was behind them, ready to overwhelm the enemy with more lethal force. Package Q called for an all-in airstrike using all of the coalition's forces. Aside from wearing down enemy defenses, the main target was the Tuwaitha Nuclear Research Center in Baghdad's outskirts. Other objectives that would strike a blow to the Iraqi regime were added hours before the operation formally began. These included the Republican Guard headquarters and the Iraqi Air Force headquarters. Package Q launched on January 19th. Aircraft departed from more than 4 locations. The plan was to gather in Saudi Arabia before the attack, where tankers would be standing by to refuel. The operational and logistical challenges of the operation quickly soured due to bad weather. The tankers approached the zone too fast and had to lower their speeds, which affected the F-16 fighters riding along with them. To make matters worse, other expected aircraft did not show up because their commanders received the orders too late the night before. Some pilots were also surprised that their orders had changed in a matter of hours, including the sudden addition of targets. Post-analysis of the Air Force's performance by the Gulf War Air Power Survey stated that, quote, such an approach would maximize the exposure of the F-16 train to enemy air defenses. However, it was too late to change the order in which the mission subsets would attack targets. U.S. pilots still believed they could pull it off, but by the time they reached the secondary objectives, after hitting nuclear reactors in the research facility, the city's inner defenses were ready to take them down. Major Jeffrey S. Tice, one of the F-16 pilots that were tasked with bombing the objectives, later said in an interview with reporter Peter Greer, quote, we felt pretty confident it wouldn't be as difficult as it seemed on paper. Despite the added difficulties, the coalition aircraft carried on with their mission. As they approached Baghdad, enemy resistance increased, with surface-to-air missiles and anti-aircraft artillery gunfire targeting them once they reached the city's airspace. As this happened, communication problems arose among the attacking forces. After mission groups hit the nuclear research facility and an oil refinery, Major Jeffrey Tice and his unit made their way to the heart of the city. It was then that his unit came under fire by surface-to-air missiles. In mere seconds, a dozen unguided missiles were launched at them. All of the rockets failed except one. As Major Tice saw the last surface-to-air missile getting closer to his F-16, he made a barrel roll to avoid it. He remembered being told that he would remain relatively safe if his F-16 was 33 feet away when the proximity fuse exploded its warhead. But it was not his lucky day. In an interview with Air Force Mag, he said, quote, I had a 32-foot day. The missile hit the F-16, and Major Tice momentarily lost the control systems. When the backup systems turned on, Major Tice took the aircraft as far as he could before it stopped responding. He was 150 miles north of the Iraqi border when he decided to let go and eject at 14,000 feet. When the Major landed, a group of Bedouin riders captured him. Although he was given a good meal and treated with respect, he was turned over to Iraqi authorities the next day. Major Tice did not know it, but he was one of only 2 pilots taken down during the entire operation. The other one was Captain Harry Mike Roberts, who was also handed over to the Iraqi intelligence. Both men were imprisoned and mistreated for almost 2 months. It was not until March 6th when they were flown out of Baghdad by the International Red Cross. Tice and Roberts' F-16s were the only casualties of Package Q. Less than satisfactory. Package Q was neither a victory nor a failure. This was mainly due to the operational and logistical challenges of coordinating aircraft that took off from multiple bases in different locations. Bad weather and coordination problems between combat groups also played a factor, which only got worse when the coalition command suddenly added more objectives. The U.S. continued to bomb Iraq and eventually established total air domination over the Iraqi skies by the end of the war. Nevertheless, no more large-scale attacks were attempted to raid the city. The Gulf War Air Power Survey concluded by saying, quote, the raid illustrates how a number of small incidents or frictions, none of which by themselves are necessarily serious, can contribute to a less than satisfactory outcome, in this case the loss of 2 F-16s. Package Q became a military lesson on why coordination between units and their commands can be more important than numbers and sheer firepower.